Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
The 2024-25 campaign is here. Welcome to NHL Wraparound Season Preview. Neil and Vic with you, and already 2 games in the books being played in Prague last weekend as the New Jersey Devils took out the Buffalo Sabres in both games. Now the schedule going ahead, 3 games on Tuesday, 5 on Wednesday, and then 9 on Thursday. But let's just go back to the Tuesday schedule. History being made in all 3 games. St. Louis and Seattle, Jessica Campbell, the first ever assistant coach behind an NHL bench for the Kraken. Then in Salt Lake City, the Utah Hockey Club play their first ever game as they host the Chicago Blackhawks. And in Sunrise, Florida, the Panthers raise their first ever Stanley Cup banner as they host the Boston Bruins. Now, speaking of Florida, we have a lot of viewers and listeners there, and wishing everybody the best as Hurricane Milton takes aim at the central part of the state. And before Milton, there was Helene, and Helene actually affected our recording schedule as we had to push our schedule back. And unfortunately, we were unable to line up our schedule with that of Darren Pang with TNT. And unfortunately, Panger couldn't be with us. However, the one great thing about NHL Wraparound, Neil, is that we have a really deep bullpen, no shortage of great guests, and you're going to introduce somebody that is very familiar to NHL fans.
Sure is. E.J. Hradek is one of the best out there on TV, and his analysis and his work and is second to none. So I'm really excited to have this show with E.J. Hradek on it from the NHL Network. Well, it's my pleasure to bring in an old friend. He's not old, but he is a longtime friend and a guy that I've known for many years and have a lot of respect for his knowledge of the NHL now, in the past, and probably a lot of knowledge about what's going to happen in the future. Just having gotten back from Prague in the Czech Republic, having done the 2 games between the Buffalo Sabres and the New Jersey Devils. EJ, welcome to NHL Wraparound.
Well, thanks, guys. Neil and Vic, both you guys I've known for a long time and worked with Vic over at ESPN. And Neil, I've been back when I was covering you and interviewing you. I remember I interviewed you when you were the Rangers general manager in Vermont, and I was a nervous wreck. It's like, Neil Smith, I got to interview Neil Smith here, and but you were very kind and you gave good answers as you always do. So, and we've become friends since then. So this is good for me to be with you guys.
Well, that's great. And the way we're going to kick this off, going to have a little bit of fun with players first. And we're kind of at a crossroads with some different eras. So what do they say when you get married? It's something old, something new, something borrowed. We're not going to quite go in that direction, but we're going to go something new, something old or older, and something in between. So we're going to start with the something new, and really the 2 new faces on the NHL landscape in Connor Bedard, the number 1 overall pick last year, and Macklin Celebrini, the first overall pick this year to the San Jose Sharks. So, EJ, I'm going to start with you. Bedard had a decent season last year, did miss a bunch of games with a broken jaw, but still wound up winning the Calder. So for Celebrini coming in, and by the way, he is going to make the opener after suffering a lower body injury late in the preseason. But what should be the expectations for him in comparison to Bedard and also for the San Jose Sharks this season?
Well, I don't think the expectations are all that high. I mean, this was a team that had just a terrible, terrible season last year, and now they bring in two kids, in Celebrini and also Will Smith, who was a high draft pick in the season before. These are young guys coming out of college hockey, and those are not the guys, at that age that are going to come in. They don't have the answers, and so they're going to learn. Both of them, I think they're in the school of hard knocks right now, right? I mean, the National Hockey League is as hard a league as you're going to find. It's the toughest league in the world. And, for me, particularly with Celebrini, I was not someone that was really anxious for him to come out this year, to be quite honest. I thought he would have been better served to play another year at BU to kind of continue to gain strength. When you're out in San Jose, and Neil, you understand this from your time as a manager. I mean, it's one thing to play in the Northeast where there's not a lot of travel and you have time to rest and practice and continue your development. When you're in San Jose, there's a lot of time spent on the plane. There's a lot of time spent on the road. There's less time for, development, physical development, time in the gym, things of that nature. You saw last year, Bedard got dinged up. It seemed Jack Hughes a couple of years ago, he got dinged up. Celebrini is a pretty young guy. I mean, he just turned 18, right after the draft or right in that window. So, for me, when you talk about expectations, I think it's one day at a time. It's a learning experience. I think right out of the gate, he'll have energy. If he's healthy, I think that, he'll give us some of those flashes, but it's 82 games and, and you're playing in the middle. One night in the Western Conference, it's Kopitar. The next night, it's McDavid. The next night, it's JT Miller. I mean, you go on and on. So it's going to be a learning experience for Celebrini. No question for me, Neil.
Yeah. And you know what, EJ, I agree totally with what you're saying. And I want to bring up another point. I've always felt that the major junior hockey is a mini NHL. It is a long season, a lot of travel, very intense, more fighting than college, not wearing a full mask like the college players do. And that stepping from major junior hockey into the National Hockey League, you've had a little bit of a taste of a mini version of that. When you play college hockey like I did, it's totally different than what junior hockey is like, and therefore totally different than what the NHL is like. And I like what you said about 82 games. I mean, college hockey is not at all like the National Hockey League. So do I think Celebrini's going to stumble or fail? Not at all. But I don't expect him to adapt as quickly as Bedard did, because Bedard came from the Regina Pats.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's a really good point, Neil, is that it is different. And, that's the other thing for me is why I thought it would have been a good year to stay for Celebrini is in Boston University and all these major colleges now, Neil, they have unbelievable facilities. I had the good fortune of being at Michigan State last year and they gave me the whole tour. And I mean, they have facilities that rival what the NHL teams have. And you're playing less. You have more time to be in the gym. You still, there were still challenges for Celebrini. He had not won a national championship at BU. He had not won a World Junior Championship with Canada, which could have been part of the year for him. And so there were still challenges, I thought, for him. But in the end, and again, Neil, I lean on your experience as a manager, right? There's a lot of factors here. The team, they've been struggling. They're looking to bring in a bright star. They're looking to sell tickets, right? So they're looking at a lot of things. For me, on the outside, I'm just looking at, hey, what's the best thing for these young guys, and in particular, this young person in Macklin Celebrini? For me, I think it would have been best to stay another year in school, but that's all water under the bridge now. He's going to play. I think you're right. He's going to do well. I think he's going to have a tremendous career, but I do think there'll be some challenges in year one.
I want to dovetail off of something that was just said about Bedard getting dinged up. Jack Hughes has been dinged up. Neil, you drafted Steve Yzerman, 5'10", 190, a relatively slight player who wound up leading the Red Wings to Stanley Cups in 97 and 98. But can smallish players be counted on to reverse the franchise fortunes? And you look at Bedard, 5'10", 185. Celebrini, 6', 190. Jack Hughes, 5'11", 175. So can these guys really be cornerstones for championship clubs, or are they more likely to become support players?
Well, and I think those measurements you just threw out there are grossly exaggerated. If Connor Bedard is 5'10" or 5'11", then I'm 8 feet tall. These are little guys. I had the good fortune of being at UBS Arena when Chicago Blackhawks were there. And I know the trainer, Ryan Martin, and I know Luke Richardson. And there was a gentleman there that had some kids with him. And they said, if you wait after the game, Connor Bedard will sign autographs for the kids. And I thought that was wonderful. I really did. And then the father, being so proud of what happened, sent me the pictures on my phone the next day. And I was trying to figure out which one was Connor Bedard. So, I mean, Stevie Yzerman, let me just make this point. Stevie Yzerman came on to Detroit and had a lot of big guys surrounding him so that they kept guys away from him. Even the greatest of all time, Wayne Gretzky, needed Messier, needed Semenko, needed big guys around him. Not just to fight other guys, but to be the big guys, the power guys, to let him be able to do his thing. And I think when your star player is smallish, you better make sure you've got a big cast of characters all around him. Again, not to fight, but to clear the way, to bull into the corner, to chase pucks, to bang bodies so that he can do what he wants. By the way, Stevie Yzerman had Gerard Gallant as his winger early in his career too, who would fight. Gerard Gallant would fight anybody at any time. He was a middleweight, but he would fight anybody. And so I think that, Chicago and San Jose are going to have to surround these two guys with the right players so that tremendous talent that these guys have can be brought out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think you saw Mike Greer go out in the offseason and try to add some veteran pieces. Chicago did that last year, right? But unfortunately for them, there's a couple of things went bad. Corey Perry, they brought him in. He had obviously some kind of sort of incident with the club. They had to let him go. They brought Taylor Hall in to be kind of a helpful player for Bedard. He got hurt early in the season. I mean, you can always, the best laid plans for everybody don't always play out, right? So they have brought in some veteran players to try to bulk up that roster to help Celebrini and Will Smith out there. But still, I do think it's going to be a challenge. And to get to your question, Vic, about can those guys be the guys that are, those pillars of winning. I mean, for me, I think the answer is yes, but, hockey and again, Neil, he did it. Neil won a Stanley Cup in '94 with the Rangers. It's a puzzle. You're putting pieces together. Those are big pieces, and you need, especially now the game has changed. There's a skill game. I think the bigger players are getting more skilled. So that's changing things again now. There was a window where the smaller player, I think, had more opportunity. And now, those bigger players, I'm in rinks all the time. I helped coach my son's youth team a couple of years back, and bigger guys are getting more skilled. So I think Celebrini is going to be a core piece. Bedard's going to be a core piece. There's no doubt about it. But if you want to win at the end of the day, you got to figure out what other pieces do you need. I always look at a hockey team as your top two centers, your 4D, and your goalie. That's kind of the spine, and you work out from there. So we'll see what Chicago and what San Jose can do. And I know this much. Going up to that podium and picking those guys first overall, that's the easy part of the job, right, Neil? It's easy to pick the great players. It's harder to figure out, okay, what do I need? What are the other pieces that make sense? That's when it gets tough.
And now let's get to something old or older. Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, the old guard kind of winding it down. The 20th season for both. The Capitals did make the playoffs last year, getting swept out by the Rangers. But I'm not certain that either the Capitals or the Penguins are contenders this year. Neil, which player do you realistically see going back to the playoffs first?
There's a chance that either one of those teams could make a wild card spot. I'm not predicting that. I think that EJ said something earlier that a team is a puzzle, and you've got to I mean, the easy puzzle is 87 and 8. Those are the easy pieces. And Pittsburgh has a couple of other real easy pieces too. When you talk about Malkin and you talk about Letang. And Washington has a pretty good surrounding, team. Like, they play as such a good, hard team, but not a lot of talent, but just a hard team to play against. Pittsburgh doesn't play, in my opinion, as a hard team at all. And I don't think they're hard to play against. And that's sad, because Sidney is such a fantastic ambassador for the game. So, Vic, to answer your question, I don't see either of them getting to the playoffs this season.
Yeah, for me, I think the Washington Capitals are a fascinating team for this season, because Brian McClellan and that group, they took some swings in the offseason. I mean, they brought in Pierre-Luc Dubois, and everybody was kind of scratching their head. Pierre-Luc Dubois was kind of a bust in LA. He's got a long contract, but he's a big, strong, fast, talented guy. He was a high draft pick. He was in Columbus. He wanted his way. He worked his way out of Columbus, got to Winnipeg, ended up not happy there, got to LA. It didn't work. He comes to Washington now, but Brian McClellan made a great point, is that, players like that are not available when they're playing well and everything's going well. And so, a 6'4", 6'5" centerman that skates like Dubois, he is not going to be available when he's at the top of his game. They're taking a shot here that they bring him into Washington. They've got a really good coach in Spencer Carberry. They have a position to really put him in a top center role there, because in Los Angeles, they had Andrei Kopitar there. They had other players there. He wasn't kind of the lead guy. They're going to give him that responsibility more so in Washington. He's got every reason to go in there and play well. And like I said, I like Spencer Carberry. I don't know if it's going to work out, but I like the fact that Brian McClellan was willing to take the shot, because I can't get this player when he's playing up to his potential, but maybe we can get him there. If it doesn't work, it's going to be on him. They'll have to deal with that. They also went out and traded, and they got Jacob Chychrun. I like Jacob Chychrun. He's another guy that, he could be a real upside for them to add to their group. So I'll be fascinated to watch that team this year. They got the two goalies in Thompson. They both catch with their right hand, right? It's Thompson and the other, now I'm losing his name. Yeah, so thank you very much, Troy Lindgren. And so that's interesting to me. How are those guys going to play together? I mean, Thompson has every reason to feel like, hey, I got shortchanged a little bit in Vegas. Those guys could be a good duo moving forward. So I'll be interested to watch Washington. As for Pittsburgh, Neil, I agree. I mean, Sidney Crosby is still one of the top players in this league. He's terrific. But, some of these other guys in that group, I don't know where those pieces all fit. They're going to need their goaltending to be consistently better this year. I don't know if they're going to get that. So I kind of lean towards Washington as being more interesting than Pittsburgh.
The one thing I want to add to this, Vic and EJ, is that it's interesting to me that these are the two teams that are most resistant to rebuilding.
Yeah.
And they're pushing that. It's like they got their hands up and they're going, no, I don't want to rebuild. No.
Yeah.
Because of 87 and because of 8.
Of course, right?
And they did, yeah. So, it's going to be interesting to see if either of those teams can pull it off. And by that, I mean, can they pull it off where they say, we didn't have to tear it down and we did okay?
Neil, in the case of the Capitals, right, there's another dynamic. Alex Ovechkin is going to break, most likely at some point in the next year or maybe, year or two, the biggest record in the sport, right? The goals record in the NHL. So they're not moving on from Alex Ovechkin. They're selling the tickets, selling the shirts. Yeah. You know the movie, right? You've seen the movie before.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're doing something that's really, I think, very difficult, is to try to rebuild while still keeping him around and keeping some of their, older guard guys around. And the same thing, kind of this rebuild, retool on the fly. I think they've been better at it than Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh maybe had more of their core pieces that they've kept to begin with. I mean, Backstrom ends up getting hurt and not being able to play, so he's out of the picture. We don't know what's going to happen with Oshie this year. He wants to play, but it's uncertain if he can play. Carlson is still a really good player for the Washington Capitals, John Carlson. He's been a really effective player in Pittsburgh. That Malkin, it's up and down. Letang, they added Erik Karlsson. That's one of those ones, Neil, to me, that's a duplicate piece. Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang, two right shot defensemen, puck moving guys. I mean, I don't know why you need both of them on your roster. When I look back at that, I don't really understand why it was a real value for the Penguins to get Karlsson.
I didn't understand it at the moment they did it. I want to mention one other thing, because I know we got some other things to move on to. But when you think about the current Penguins and you think about the current Caps, but more the current Penguins, just think about how loyal the Ilitches and Ken Holland were to their Stanley Cup vets and where that landed them. It landed them from a 24 or 25, Vic will correct me, year playoff run to a now how many year playoff drought. And that's because they stayed loyal to their guys and they didn't want to do the rebuild. Then finally, the wheels fell off the cart because the guys, even the great Nick Lidstrom became too old to keep playing. And now they're down to that. So this is what the Penguins have to really worry about. You're going to stay loyal to these guys, Malkin and Crosby and Letang, and I don't know why they'd be loyal to Karlsson. But anyway, the wheels are going to fall off that cart at some point.
Hey, Neil, let me ask you this, because you've been in this situation in your career. It is a difficult dance to walk, particularly with Crosby in Pittsburgh, because he just signed a new deal. So he's staying, right? But you saw it happen with Chicago with Patrick Kane. Now, they tore it all down to the studs, and they're hoping to get back in the mix. They have a lot of good young players. But, it is a difficult dance because management, even if they want to move a guy, can't really say it, because then you're in the marketplace, you're viewed right as bad. And the player, even if he has any idea of maybe it's time for me to move on, he can't go to the media and say, yeah, trade me. Very rarely, right? I mean, this is a guy that has had a long history in that particular market. So I do think it's a delicate dance. In the end, Crosby decided to stay. I don't know if I would have, but he decided to stay in Pittsburgh. We'll see how that plays out. But you're right. By putting off rebuilds, they're staying afloat, but neither one of them is really a cup contender right now. And at some point in time, a bigger rebuild is going to be necessary.
Quick crystal ball, one-word answer. Alex Ovechkin is 41 goals behind Wayne Gretzky. He has averaged 41 goals over the course of his last 3 seasons. Yes or no? Does he get it this year?
No.
Neil?
No.
All right. We'll come back to that in April.
All right. Yeah.
Let's go something in between. Connor McDavid, Auston Matthews, the pressure in the prime of the careers of both. Neil, I'm going to start with you on this one. McDavid within a game of the Stanley Cup, but with the salary cap the way it is, Draisaitl has been signed. His contract is going to come up in a couple of years. Will they ever be able to get the necessary support players to push McDavid over the finish line? And I know we talked about this during the summer, but it's worth mentioning again coming into the new season.
Well, and I think that they got to do it quick. I don't know if they can do it because of their losses they took this summer. I'm not sure that they can do it this season coming up, although I think they're going to have a brilliant season and they're going to be a top contender all year long. But I'm not sure when the playoffs come if they've got the depth of quality to be able to win. We could see that this year, even with McDavid and even with Draisaitl and even with Evan Bouchard and Skinner playing well, they faced an opponent that they couldn't get around in Florida. They did stretch it out to 7, but they couldn't get it done. They better get it done quick, because I think when they sign McDavid in next year which won't click in till the year after, he's got 2 more years and then a new contract will click in. When that thing clicks in, I don't know how they're going to have any third line players. It's going to be a first line and then 3 fourth lines. because, and guess what, guys? The same GM that ran into this problem in Chicago with Kane and Taves and Duncan Keith and on and on and on is now running into it again in Edmonton, and that's Stan Bowman. And he didn't really do a great job of handling it in Chicago. No criticism there. Just facts. He gave those contracts. He gave those long contracts. He didn't give them. He negotiated long contracts with Kane and Taves, 8-year deals, I believe it was. They were good for 3 years, the Chicago Blackhawks, but the last 5, they bottomed out those last 5 years of that contract. So it's a challenge for Stan, but he's seen the movie before. He should know how to do it.
Well, I will say this, Neil, at the end of the day, you know how it goes, right? They won 3 cups in their 8 or 9 years there, right? So at the end of the day, you're the winner. You won 3 cups. I mean, like, if you don't win, that's when it's really bad. Like, the Rangers had good teams in, the late aughts and into the next decade. They went to the final against LA. They had good teams. They never won. So all those things that they did just didn't matter. They didn't win. And there were other teams in that win. San Jose, another team, they got to the final one year. They didn't win. They had Thornton. They had Marlowe. They had all kinds of different pieces. Didn't happen. So Chicago, they won. So, you're right that some of those things didn't work out in the long run, but in the short run, they managed to win. And then they had some bad luck with Jonathan Toews because he got, he had some kind of illness or injury and he's had to step away from it. Kane was still a productive player, but they just ran out of pieces. They made some missteps. Trading away Panarin probably was something that was done too soon. As for what's going on with the Oilers, I tend to agree with you, Neil. The time is now. They always say in hockey, you got to learn how, you lose before you win, right? You lose tough ones. It's hard and you figure it out. Well, the Oilers have now lost 3 consecutive years to the team that won the Stanley Cup. And last year they lost in a Game 7, against the Florida Panthers. So it doesn't get any more painful to lose than what happened to them. So now is the time. A lot of people feel it will be the time. They have Stuart Skinner had a great experience last year. He had some big moments. Can he do it again? They added another Skinner, Jeff Skinner. And let's face it, guys leave Buffalo and they go to other teams and then they end up winning the Stanley Cup. I mean, we've seen that in a number of different cases with O'Reilly and Montour and Reinhardt and Eichel. So who knows if that's going to continue. But, the time is now. And when they do sign McDavid to the longer term deal and they are paying a lot more money, they can only hope that the salary cap will continue to rise exponentially to give them a little bit more room. But it will be challenging because in a cap league where it's a team sport, there's only so much money to go around.
Great point. And as we move over to the other player who's probably got more pressure than anybody else to win now would be the Maple Leafs' Auston Matthews, who has won 1 playoff series in his entire career. He is now the new captain of the Maple Leafs. How do you see the mesh with Craig Berube? And is he ready to take that next step? Because frankly, he has not been a great playoff player during the course of his career. And he certainly has enough experience that we certainly should be seeing more by now. What do you think, EJ?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm glad he's finally the captain of the Leafs because I never really understood what they were doing in Toronto. I mean, it's a new world we live in these last 10, 12 years, right? Young players come into the league, franchise players, they become the captain. That's just the way it is. I mean, Landeskog was in Colorado was the youngest. Crosby was a young captain. McDavid was a young captain. I mean, Auston Matthews should have been the captain of that team several years ago. For some reason, it kicked around. It ended up with John Tavares being the captain, who wasn't even kind of a homegrown Leaf there. So I didn't understand the dynamic of that to begin with. So I think he's rightfully the captain now. He is the guy that shoulders the most pressure, whether they win or lose. Even if it's his fault, not his fault, he's the guy they go to. We'll see what kind of leader he is going to be with that C on his chest. He's one of the great goal scorers really in the history of this game. When they went out and got Tavares a couple of years ago, Neil and I have had this conversation in the past. They spent a lot of money. They had a lot of money, top heavy with forwards, couldn't fix their D, weren't sure in goal. I like some of the moves that they've made now with Craig Berube in there. It'll be fascinating to watch a different approach with this Maple Leafs team. But I am happy, Neil, that Auston Matthews is now wearing the C because to me, it just seemed weird that he wasn't.
I agree with you. And he's clearly their best player and he's a league he's a league elite player, however you want, franchise player. I mean, he's a franchise player, but he's in the category of the Crosbys and Ovechkins and Lemieux and Gretzky's, and that you buy tickets to watch Auston Matthews play in Buffalo or play in Florida. So I agree with you. I think one of the problems that Toronto has, and I'm hoping for Toronto because I have friends there, and I do like Brendan Shanahan, and I do admire the job he's done as president of the team. But one of the things is they're a very poorly constructed team. And by that, what I mean is they had some great picks. You can't help it that you're down and you get a chance to pick Matthews. Of course, you get a chance to pick Marner. You're going to pick Marner. You get, all these other guys that they've got that are great players. But did you ever think of this, EJ and Vic? Like, how many architects have they brought in to try to finish building the building? Like, they had a plan, okay? And all of a sudden, Lou Lamoriello was now the chief architect of the building. And, Lou is turfed out of there, and in comes this young guy that's got a different way of doing architecture, and he's now running the building. And then after a while, they decide to let him go, and then they bring in Brad Treveling as the chief architect that's supposed to get this building finished. And I don't think you can build a Stanley Cup team with 3 or 4 different architects. I just don't think it can happen.
Well, it's going to be certainly a challenge for them. I do think the fact that, they're trying to play a little bit of a different game, be harder to play against. At the end of the day, though, like, where is that number 1 D in Toronto? Like, who is that? Like, Horace. Go through all the Cup winners in history. They're usually, like, their defense, they usually have that one or two guys that you can really lean on defensively. I mean, with your team, you had Brian Leach and you had Sergei Zubov, and you had really other good bit pieces on defense. Jeff Boogboom, big, strong, physical. I mean, you had
Kevin Lowe.
Experienced guy, had won championships before. Neil, I'll ask you that while we're talking about this. Like, how is important? Because it was a conversation I had, when I was doing the games out in Prague about, like, Buffalo didn't go out and add, like, guys that have had Stanley Cup winning experience. Like, how important is it to have a couple of those guys on your roster?
It's very important. It's critical, especially when you're going for the cup, but even when you're building, to have guys that cannot stand to lose. Because once you've won the cup, you never want to lose. Like, you don't win the cup every year, obviously, but you gotta have guys that are going to get in the dressing room and scream their head off at guys on a night when they're being embarrassed. And I went to the 30th anniversary of our team winning the Stanley Cup. The guys all got together, and I heard a story about Jeff Boogboom. Jeff told it himself about him just lighting into a couple of guys in the locker room on our team because Pittsburgh was beating us pretty bad. We were in Pittsburgh and just like throwing stuff around the locker room. And this is Book who'd won in Edmonton, won with the Rangers. He couldn't stand it. He went ape crap because these guys weren't playing the way they weren't taking it seriously enough. And you need guys like that in your room.
Yeah. It's not about, everybody likes to win, Neil, right? I think you nailed it for fans out there. It's like, to me, it's give me the guys that just hate to lose. They just hate to lose. They won't tolerate it. There's enough guys, it's an old thing, winning is great. Losing is okay. Losing can never be okay in professional sports and certainly in each room. And we're looking at Buffalo, which has they have some really interesting young players there and they've paid them a lot of money. And yet this is a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 13 or 14 years. And I just wonder, they need those type of guys in the room. And there's other teams in the league that are like that. They need those type of guys to kind of set the standard and hold people accountable because it's such an important piece of this game.
Pure and simple. You got to hate to lose more than you love to win. And I think the interesting thing with Matthews is, he wants to win, but does he have that fire that we have seen with Connor McDavid and Crosby and Ovechkin? And to me, that's where he needs to take it to the next level if Toronto is going to get to the next level. So before we wrap up this segment, want to look at breakout skaters for this year. I actually have 3 of them, so I'm going to defer to you two guys first.
Well, listen, give us your 3. Give us your 3.
You want my 3? I'll give you my 3 first. You guys are taking up enough oxygen so far,
That's
so
right.
I'm going to give you my 3. In order, I'm looking at Wyatt Johnston of the Dallas Stars, who I believe was the single best shift-to-shift player during the course of the playoffs last year. First 2 years in the league, 24 and 32 goals. I have him between 45 and 50 this year. My second, Owen Tippett of the Flyers. 27 and 28 in his last 2 seasons with the Flyers. I see him going 40 to 45. I think the time is now that some of these kids start to develop, and I expect a big year from him. And then you're going to be really surprised by this last one. I can give you guys 50 guesses, and you're not going to come up with it. Kirill Marchenko of the Columbus Blue Jackets, and I think this is coming off the Johnny Gaudreau tragedy. This is a great opportunity for him to step up. His first 2 years, 21 and 23 goals. I see him at the 35 to 40 goal level this year.
Wow. Okay. That's a good one. That's a deep cut, as they say in the music business right there. But he's a big body, and you're right. He's had moments where he's shined. So we'll see if you're on it with those. But I like those. Wyatt Johnston. I mean, that's a hockey player, right? Right, Neil? That's a hockey player. I mean, he's terrific. And I like Tippett, too. If Tippett stays healthy, I mean, he can flat out fly, that kid. And he can shoot it. And that's turned out to be a really nice acquisition from the Florida Panthers in that Claude Giroux trade. I'm just going to give you a simple one here. I'm going to give you Connor Bedard, because I think that he is going to take it to another level this year. I think they've added some help around him this year. Hopefully, those guys will stay healthy and be part of the mix. But I think Connor Bedard could take it up, challenge 100 points this year, and be what he. I think he's got the ability to do all those things. It's going to be a while before the Hawks can get to a place where they're, challenging to get in the playoffs and to win. But I think this kid has got the ability to light it up on a night-to-night basis.
EJ took out a short club. What do you got there, Neil?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say I agree with EJ on Connor Bedard, and I hope he is right, because I would love to see this kid show again another leap. It's good for the league. It's good for all of us. We work in the business. I mean, I'd love to see it. The one thing I'd worry about with him is this year will be tougher for him than last year was, because everybody now knows what's coming at them, and that's often called the sophomore jinx. What it really is that it isn't as easy the second year when everybody knows you as it is the first year, but we'll see what happens. My guy is the new captain of the Utah Hockey Club, Clayton Keller. And I really like this kid. He's in mid-career. He's just been named captain. He's got so much incentive to have he could own Salt Lake City from the hockey perspective, because he is going to be their leading scorer again, I'm sure. But how much of a leading scorer? Is he going to be in the top 10 in the league, the top 5? If he can do that, I mean, he's going to, and I think he will. I think he's that good that he can do that. And I think putting the C on him, EJ, to your point about Matthews, there you go. They gave the C to their best player, Clayton Keller. And so, let's see what happens anyways. But I think those are all good picks. And you know what, Vic? Wyatt Johnston, that's a great pick. That's a great pick.
And our reminder that our website is NHLWraparound.com. All of our episodes available on both audio and video platforms. And we will also be adding in some commentary during the course of the 2024-25 season. So now that we've talked about players relatively in depth, let's talk about the teams a little bit and power shifts. And quickly, teams that we see on the rise, who is also maybe ready to take a little bit of a step downward. So, Neil, we'll go with you first. Your team's on the rise.
I love what New Jersey Devils did this summer. I thought Tom Fitzgerald did a great job. I love what the Nashville Predators did this season, although they better get it. They better do it quickly because they're about one of the oldest teams in the league now, but they're a talented team for this year. I really like Doug Armstrong, St. Louis Blues, and what he did. I wouldn't have had him there before those offer sheets, but then he did that, and signing Buchnevich, I thought was great. I like the Utah Hockey Club and what they did this summer. They added some really good pieces, bolstered their defense. So those are my teams.
Yeah, you mentioned Nashville, Neil. The thing too to keep an eye on with the Preds this year, they got 3 first-round picks in the draft. They can be a big-time player at the trade deadline because of that draft capital. And let's face it, they're in it to win it right now. So if they can do something at the deadline, I assume they're going to do it. So, that's a team that could get better with some acquisitions at the end of the year. I like New Jersey. I think they fixed their issues with the goaltending among most notably. So there I take on the upswing. I like the Ottawa Senators. I thought they were going to bounce up last year. It didn't happen. I think this is a year things are going to come together a little bit more for them. I agree with you about Utah. I like their team because I remember being in Dallas when Minnesota showed up there in the early 90s, and it just a tremendous energy that you get from something like that. So I'll have them. I love the Blues too, but and I like the Flyers as well. So I'll add Philly to that mix, and just to be disagreeable, I guess, more than anything else. And I like the young players, and they got to figure out the goaltending there. That's going to be a big challenge moving forward.
And the one team that I'm going to add to your guys' mix is the Detroit Red Wings, who managed to make it to the last day of the regular season last year before getting bounced out. So who's going to slip, EJ?
All right. Well, I think, I think the Pittsburgh Penguins, they've been kind of a little bit slip over the last couple of years. They could be slipping a little bit again. I'll give you Tampa Bay as a possible team that slips because they rode that power play for a long time. I'll be interested to see. They have Genso. They moved out Stamkos, right? They don't have somebody now in that left circle that could shoot the puck like Stamkos. So they better be better 5-on-5. I would imagine that's what they're thinking they're going to be. But I think that Tampa could be, it could be a little slippage there for the Tampa Bay team. The Colorado Avalanche, I wonder about too. It's been an up and down off season for them. Landeskog's not coming back. They're still going to be very good. But I do wonder, how are things going to play out there? So it might be a little bit of a slip for them. And the LA Kings, they start the season without Drew Doughty, and that's a big loss. I don't care if Drew is in his 30s. He's a big-time player for them, so I think there could be a little slippage there.
Yep.
Well, I'm gonna upset EJ because I'm gonna say the team that's gonna slip is the team that he said he thought might rise, and that's Minnesota. I don't see what they did this summer except lose guys, and they're still under that heavy anvil of those contracts that they're buying out with Suter and Parise. This is, I think, the last year that they've got that albatross around their neck. I agree with EJ on the LA Kings. I think I thought they were slipping to begin with, and now Doughty slipped on the ice and broke his ankle. I think the Carolina Hurricanes are still going to make the playoffs. I don't think they're going to be a bad team, but they're not going to be as good as they were last year because they just took too many losses in the offseason. And the other team, and I hate to say it because we have had this general manager on our show, but the Winnipeg Jets, I think they took a lot of losses. I don't see any additions, and they had a first round exit last year. I just don't think they're going to be as good.
I actually had all 3 of those teams on my list. So I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent, but we are in agreement nonetheless. All right. So going to ask the 8 playoff teams from each conference. We'll go Eastern Conference first. Give me your 8. And then the one team that may sneak in if somebody slips. EJ?
All right. Well, in the East, I guess if you go in the Atlantic, I think Florida, Boston, Toronto, they're going to be in. So I'll give you those 3. And the Metro, I like the Devils. I think the Rangers will get in. So that's 5. Carolina probably has enough to get in. That's 6. I guess Tampa maybe gets in. Maybe Ottawa moves in this year. So I'll go with those. Those as my other teams.
Neil?
I'll do the East to back up EJ. Here's who I think it's going to be. I think there's going to be one spot. I'll say that to be one spot, and you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams fighting for one wild card spot. Who are the 7 teams that I say are going to get in and won't have to fight for wild card? Rangers, Devils, Carolina Hurricanes, Boston Bruins, Toronto Maple Leafs, Tampa Bay Lightning, and the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. If all of them get in, there's only one spot open for a dogfight between the Islanders, Flyers, Penguins, Caps, Senators, and Red Wings.
Well, who's it going to be? I got the Senators.
Guess. Well, I think Detroit is the team that I would say squeezes in. I see 5 from the Atlantic, 3 from the Metro. But if somebody slips, I think Torts gets it done, and the Flyers become that 8th team. Western Conference. Neil, you first.
Okay, in the West, I got a little bit differently, and I just want to explain how I did this. There's 6 teams that I'm sure are going to make it, and I'm going to give you those 6. And then there's 2 spots open, and I think those 2 spots will be fought over by 5 different teams. So the 6 that are guaranteed to get in, according to Know Nothing Neil Smith, is Dallas, Colorado, Nashville, St. Louis, Vancouver, and Edmonton. That leaves 2 wildcard spots, and those are going to be a dogfight between Utah, Winnipeg, LA Kings, Vegas Golden Knights, and Seattle.
Yeah. All right. I'll give you Dallas, Winnipeg, Colorado, Nashville, St. Louis coming out of the Central, and I'll give you Vancouver, Edmonton, and Vegas coming out of the Pacific. I think you underestimate Vegas a little bit there, Neil.
Maybe right, but they took some tough losses this summer.
Yeah. Well, they still got some big horses there, though. I mean, they still got Eichel. They still got, hopefully, Pietrangelo is a worry because he had some health issues, so you're wondering where he's going to be. But this is still a team that has some high-end people, and you're hoping for their sake. I mean, they went out and got Tomas Hertl. I don't think when he came in there last year, he was really the Tomas Hertl that we thought, that we remember. But he's had a full summer now to kind of get himself healthy again and to be ready to play with the Vegas Golden Knights. So I think they're a team that always, if they're struggling, they'll find a way to fix it. They'll go out and get somebody else. That's just who they are.
See, this is why I like EJ, though, because I happen to agree with all of his teams. And the one club that I think may sneak in if somebody slips up is the Utah Hockey Club. I think it's about time. New setting. They're on the verge of something. So I would love to see them get in their first season in Salt Lake City. Okay. Last 4 champions have been Tampa Bay, who won it twice, including the year in the bubble in 2020, Colorado, Vegas, Florida. Different team makeups, different styles. But as we all know, this is a copycat league. So can the Panthers win again? Or if they don't, what's the next flavor of the year? EJ, I'm going to go with you first on this.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think it'll be some story if the Florida Panthers can win again, because first of all, it's hard to win back to back, as we know, right? It's happened a couple times. Pittsburgh did it. More recently, Tampa did it in odd circumstances with the pandemic and with the bubble. Prior to that, it had been the Red Wings back in 97 and 98. So it's hard to do that. But in Florida's case, they went to the final the year before that. So they would have been, a 3 straight year type situation. Like Tampa, they went a third time, but then they lost. So I think it'll be hard for Florida to win. But I think this league is so kind of wide open right now. It's crazy. I just think that, New Jersey is really interesting to me, maybe because I just saw them in Prague, and, they've got 8 defensemen. They have 2 guys that didn't play. Luke Hughes and Brett Pesce didn't even play in those games. So they're 8 deep, Neil. And I mean, you would know, Neil, right? You never have enough defensemen, right? They got Marchand, they got Allen, they got veteran goaltenders, they got some really high-end forwards, and then they've added some bit pieces that are helpful. I think the Devils are a team that really could kind of find their way there this year and could be a handful for the Florida Panthers. And, you talked about Wyatt Johnston earlier. I think the Dallas Stars are another team. I think the Dallas Stars are going to be better this year. I mean, Joe Pavelski was a great, great player for many years, probably going to the Hall of Fame at some point, but he had really slowed down in the second half of last year. This is a team. Maverick Bourque is a good young player that's on the rise for them. They're going to be a quicker team to add with some of those other really good young players they have. So, those are two teams that are really interesting for me this year.
Neil, is this a system thing, or is it just the rigors of having to win back-to-back?
I think it's the guys cashing in on winning a Stanley Cup and moving to other teams. And like Montour has gone, I thought he was fabulous for Florida last year, and they lost several guys. Ekman Larson went to Toronto, who also was very valuable in the playoffs. But I think the biggest reason why I don't predict Florida to win the Stanley Cup is because I'm not sure that Bobrovsky can do it again at that age that he's at. Everybody was surprised that he was so fantastic at the age he's at now. Last season, and he was fantastic. I don't know that he can do that again. And they don't have anybody that's going to carry them to the cup like he did. So I'll say that I don't think that's going to happen. I think Edmonton's got a real good window here, EJ, like you said earlier, and I think they're hungry. And I think McDavid, it was hurt really badly by the fact that they couldn't win it last year, and he's got an agenda now to want to win it. And Draisaitl's got that agenda, so I think they're going to be hard. I think Dallas is good. I don't see another team in the East to really win the cup. I do love the Devils, what they did, but I'm not sure. Can they go from where they were to winning the cup? I don't. It is a long road, but I do think I will predict one thing that Vic hasn't even asked about. Sheldon Keefe will win the Adams Trophy.
Oh, okay. There you go.
He will.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Neil, you make a great point, because that Jack Adams Award is always based on kind of, where did you start the season? It's like, the Devils missed the playoffs last year. So if they have this great season and they make the playoffs, who's the hero? The head coach. So, I think that's a sound pick, Neil. I think there's a good chance of that happening. And he looked in full command of that group in Prague. Obviously, it's a long season, so we'll see how it plays out. But, that's a good pick. I like that one.
So that brings us to the finish line and our Stanley Cup final predictions.
Well, I'll just add to what Neil said about, the back-to-back and winning a second year. The biggest thing for me is that at the end of the day, you got to have that hunger to do whatever it takes. And I mean, kind of whatever it takes, and to play through all kinds of things. And sometimes when you've won that first time, the edge is off a little bit, and it doesn't take much. So that's what'll be the challenge for Florida. I think if I talked about the two teams, I think the Devils could get to the final, and I think the Dallas Stars could get there. And I think that would be a really fun Stanley Cup final. So that's my pick for now here in October. And we'll see if I have any clue by the end of the year.
Neil, you got a clue?
Am I allowed, not usually, but am I allowed to pick two teams and say one of these two teams is going to win the cup?
No, this is your podcast. This is your podcast.
I forgot. I'm going to say one of these two teams will win the Stanley Cup in 2025. Edmonton Oilers or the Nashville Predators.
Okay.
I think Steven Stamkos has an agenda and a goal of sticking it right up to Tampa Bay. You notice I didn't say where, but I think he's got that agenda that he wants to show the world that he's still Steven Stamkos, the franchise player.
Well, I think I'm going to stick it to TNT right here, because I'm going in a completely different direction with an all-Canadian final. And I'm going to say that the Toronto Maple Leafs finally get it figured out under Craig Berube. Auston Matthews figures it out, and they somehow manage to survive the Bruins, survive the East, and they are going to play and lose to the the Vancouver Canucks.
Wow.
And here's the thought process here is that the Canucks were the one team that was truly not afraid of the Oilers. And I believe if they get a healthy Thatcher Demko back, I love what they've done during the offseason. And I believe that they are really going to be flying under the radar with what the Oilers' success was last year and the Predators doing what they did during the course of the offseason. I think this is a great spot for them to rise up and after 4 tries, finally winning the Stanley Cup.
Ooh, okay.
All right.
This would be their fourth. This would be their 4th try because they lost to the New York Islanders in 1982.
That's right.
Then lost to the New York Rangers in 1994, and then lost to the Boston Bruins in 2011.
11. There you
know,
go.
EJ, I want to thank you for spending all this time. I mean, this has been gone. You are so easy that's why this thing goes forever, because we could talk forever on here. And, you're a great, great guest. I mean, you do this for a living, so it shouldn't be a surprise. Please come back and join us again at some point. I just love doing this with you.
Well, listen,
really
if we get all these predictions right, I'll be happy to come back and we'll talk about it. If it goes the other way, I'm not so sure, but I probably would come back anyway. Because listen, who knows? It's a crazy sport. People talk. They ask you all the time. They ask you, Neil, Vic, who's going to win? Like, listen, if I knew, I'd be sitting there on that nice poolside in Vegas, relaxing and taking it easy, right? We don't know. This is a 32-team league now. It's hard to win. It's going to be a fun season. So I'm looking forward to it. And thanks for the time. I appreciate being with you.
And come back before we find out that our predictions were all wrong. Come back during the regular season. Therefore, you can't get hammered on anything.
There you go. All right. Sounds good to me. All right.
So we didn't make enough predictions, though. So somebody's got to be right at some point, right?
One or two of them.
This is the human side of the story, brought to you by the Game 7 Group. Another season underway, 32 teams hopeful to play for the Stanley Cup, and perhaps, once again, we see a Game 7. Because Game 7 has a magic attached to it like nothing in sport. In order to prevail, teamwork is essential to achieving success. At the Game 7 Group, transforming individuals into cohesive teams is the core philosophy in their team building approach. Their belief is every team has potential to achieve extraordinary results. Game 7 Group offers various services to help teams accomplish their goals through specific team building events, coaching, and speaking engagements. These services are aimed at improving team dynamics, productivity, and overall performance. Face it, we all want to be able to succeed in the big moment. Check out the Game 7 Group website at game7group.com/NHL Wraparound to learn more. Right now, a special incentive offer awaits our podcast listeners. Take your team to the next step. The Game 7 Group will get you there. And, Neil, as a new season starts, as a fan growing up, you know that now you are locked in for the next 8.5 months with great entertainment. And coming from the television production world, you were always looking to how you were going to weave that thread of storylines throughout the course of a season. But for a GM, you've worked all summer. You have now built your team, and now the fruits of that labor are starting to come through. What is it like having been a GM and anticipating the season?
Vic, the best way to describe this for listeners is to talk about a Broadway show. And in a Broadway show, the producer, director gets all the people together, gets all the performers together, the actors together, works on the play for a long, long time, tries to get the right people in place, tries to get the right choreography, get this thing completely buttoned down. And then when the curtain goes up, you're just one of the audience. And there's nothing more you can do. You've done everything you can do, and you hope that that product is what you thought it would be. So what a general manager does in the National Hockey League is from the moment his team is eliminated, whether they miss the playoffs, whether they go out in one of the rounds of the playoffs, or even if they win the Stanley Cup, as soon as that's over, his work starts again to go and improve the club as much as he possibly can from that day up until the season opener that next season. And as E.J. Hradek said earlier, it is like a puzzle, and you're trying to get the right pieces to fit in the right place in that puzzle. And you're working hard to do that. You've also taking losses. Every team now takes losses. So imagine you've got a puzzle and you think you only need 2 pieces to finish it, and then 3 pieces leave. So now you got 5 pieces that you got to replace in there. And you hope that your work in previous years in developing, drafting and developing has produced pieces that might be able to step into those spots on that puzzle. But as I said, the hardest part about it is when that puck drops on the opening night, you're just sitting up in the press box with a box of popcorn.
And there are 32 GMs doing it right now. And fortunately, you're one of only 40 men that have been GMs of Stanley Cup champions. So with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of NHL Wraparound. We want to thank E.J. Hradek, and thanks to the Game 7 Group for sponsoring us. And thank you to our listeners. We look forward to a long season ahead with you. Send questions or comments to nhlwraparound@gmail.com. And don't forget our website, nhlwraparound.com. All of our episodes available on audio and video. Now, next week, the ECHL comes to NHL Wraparound as we welcome the first African-American majority owners of a professional hockey team when former NFL star Miles Jack and his mom LJ join us. We look forward to seeing you then.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.